Today in this video everybody today in this video we will be discussing about the reproduction found in algae. So in the last video we had a discussion on the general characteristics of algae or the salient features of algae, and also we saw the habit and habitat in which algae occurs. And all these points to the heterogeneous nature of algae, the heterogeneous peculiarity shown by this group. Now, when we come to reproduction also, we see that this is the same in the case of algal reproduction also. It shows heterogeneity in the different types of reproduction. Also within the different types, the various mechanisms the spores produced, all are very diverse in this group. In algae we find all the three forms of reproduction. There is vegetative reproduction, asexual reproduction, and also sexual reproduction. So all the three forms of reproduction, vegetative, asexual and asexual, are found in algae. And again, in these different types of reproduction, vegetative, asexual or sexual, we find various mechanisms that are used. So here in vegetative propagation, we can see that some algae, especially unicellular algae like diatoms and desmids, show fission. So here we see binary fission, where the unicellular cell divides to form two daughter cells, and these daughter cells then form the new individual algae. We find fragmentation, in which portions of the algal body are detached and separated from the parent thallus to form new algae. And budding is a form of fission in which a bulging is developed on the thallus of certain algae, which get detached, and these buds then develop into new algae. We have propagules, which are structures that develop on algae and are released. They are also called gemme. We find hormogonia, which are found in certain algae, where a few cells become separated from the algae. Hormogonia is a few-celled structure with a rounded end, which detaches from the vegetative part of the thallus. Then there are protronema, which are short branched structures that emerge from spores. And there are tubers, which are found in the parts like rhizoids in the case of Chara. In the portions that are used for attachment, there are these tubers. Bulbils are vegetative buds which store food, and these again are found in Chara. And star-shaped vegetative structures used for propagation, called amylum stars, are also found in Chara. So all these different means of vegetative propagation, we will be seeing them again when we discuss the different algae, when we see the types that we have to study. So during type study we will see these again. And so these are different means of vegetative propagation. Now when we come to asexual reproduction, we see the formation of different types of spores. There are motile spores which are biflagellate or multiflagellate, so that they can move through water. There are aplanospores, which are non-motile spores that are produced in unfavorable conditions. They are larger ones. Akins are spores which are having food reserves and are covered by thick coverings, resistant coverings that protect them. There are autospores, which resemble the vegetative cells, and autospores are usually found in diatoms, which are unicellular, and these vegetative cells of diatoms can get converted into spores called autospores. Again, in diatoms we find certain spores which are devoid of the covering or cell wall, and the naked protoplasm is called the oxospores. There are hypnospores, which are non-motile, resistant, large spores which store food. We find exospores, which are formed external to the thallus of the algae from the surface of the thallus. Endospores are spores which are formed within structures in the thallus of algae. And there are carpospores, which are formed from special structures called the carposporangium. Monospores are also found developed within specialized structures. There are tetraspores, which are spores that develop from the tetrasporangium. And so we find these different types of spores, and again we will be seeing these spores as we discuss the types of algae that we study. So during type study we will be seeing in detail some of these spores. Now finally we come to sexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction in algae shows three mechanisms. There is the most primitive mechanism called isogamy, there is anisogamy, and there is the most advanced mechanism which is called oogamy. In algae, sexual reproduction involves the formation of gametes, and so this is called gametic reproduction. So in algae we find gametic reproduction, and sometimes in some algae like fucus, the gametes fuse external to the plant body or thallus in the water surrounding the algae. അപ്പോൾ ചിലപ്പം ഇങ്ങനെയുള്ള ഗാമറ്റിക് ഫ്യൂഷൻ ഫെർട്ടിലൈസേഷൻ നടക്കുന്നത് ആൽഗയുടെ ചുറ്റും കാണുന്ന ജലത്തിലായിരിക്കും, അവിടെ വെച്ചായിരിക്കും ഫ്യൂഷൻ നടക്കുന്നത്. ആൻഡ് ഇൻ സം കേസസ് this may take place within the body, so it is internal fusion may take place in some algae. അപ്പം ചില ആൽഗയിൽ റിപ്രൊഡക്റ്റീവ് സ്ട്രക്ചർ ഉണ്ടാവും. ആ റിപ്രൊഡക്റ്റീവ് സ്ട്രക്ചറിലോട്ട് മെയിൽ ഗാമറ്റും ഫീമെയിൽ ഗാമറ്റ് ഫീമെയിൽ ഗാമറ്റിൻ്റെ അടുത്ത് വരികയോ ഒക്കെ ചെയ്ത് അതിൻ്റെ ഉള്ളിലായിരിക്കും ഇത് ഫെർട്ടിലൈസേഷന് വിധേയമാവുന്നത്. സോ ഇറ്റ് ക്യാൻ ബി എക്സ്റ്റേണൽ ആൻഡ് ഇറ്റ് ക്യാൻ ബി ഇൻറ്റേർണൽ. And in some algae, both the male and female gametes are on the same thallus. So they are produced on the same thallus. This is called homothallism. അപ്പോൾ ഹോമോതാലിസത്തിൽ ഒരേ താലസിൻ്റെ മുകളിൽ നിന്ന് തന്നെ മെയിലും ഫീമെയിലുമായിട്ടുള്ള ഗാമെറ്റ്സ് ഉൽപ്പാദിപ്പിക്കപ്പെട്ട് റിപ്രൊഡക്ഷൻ നടക്കുന്നു. But there are algae in which different thalli produce the മെയിൽ ആൻഡ് ഫീമെയിൽ റിപ്രൊഡക്റ്റീവ് സ്ട്രക്ചേഴ്സ്. അപ്പോൾ ഒരു താലസിൻ്റെ മുകളിൽ മെയിൽ റിപ്രൊഡക്റ്റീവ് സ്ട്രക്ചർ, മറ്റേതിൻ്റെ മുകളിൽ ഫീമെയിൽ റിപ്രൊഡക്റ്റീവ് സ്ട്രക്ചർ, ഇങ്ങനെ ഉണ്ടാകുന്ന ആൽഗയും ഉണ്ട്. സോ ദിസ് ഈസ് കോൾഡ് ഹെറ്ററോതാലിസം, ഇൻ വിച്ച് ദ reproductive structures, male and female reproductive structures, are formed on separate thalli. All these differences are present, and we, as I mentioned earlier, we see that there are three mechanisms of sexual reproduction. So in isogamy, we find that the male and female gametes are similar. So both gametes that are involved in fusion are similar to each other, and they can be morphologically and physiologically similar. Morphology is the external appearance of the gamete, and physiology denotes the behavior of the gamete. അപ്പോൾ അത് എങ്ങനെ അവിടെ പ്രവർത്തിക്കുന്നു അതാണ് ഫിസിയോളജി. അതെങ്ങനെ ആണ് പുറമേ നിന്നുള്ള അതിൻ്റെ ഘടന അതാണ് മോർഫോളജി. This is called isogamy. Both gametes are similar morphologically and physiologically. അല്ലെങ്കിൽ നമുക്കിങ്ങനെ പറയാം, both gametes are morphologically or physiologically similar. കാരണം in some cases we find, like in the case of ectocarpus, we find that one gamete is non-motile while the other gamete is motile and moves to the non-motile gamete for fusion. So here we see physiological dissimilarity. There is morphological similarity for the gametes, but one gamete does not move. And so we find cases in which the gametes are morphologically similar but physiologically dissimilar in isogamy. And the gametes involved in isogamy are isogametes. So isogametes are gametes that are morphologically or physiologically similar in some algae. And in some algae, these gametes are naked. They are called gymnogametes. And in some cases, they are covered. They have an external envelope. And they are called calyptogametes, gametes which are covered. In the case of diatoms, we find the presence of two different strains. There is positive and negative strains which are involved in fusion. So this is called autogamy, the type of isogamy in which fusion is between positive and negative strains of algae. In some cases, the vegetative cells become gametes. So this is called hologamy, and the gametes are hologametes. And so these are the peculiarities that we find in isogamy. Now in anisogamy, the gametes are not similar to each other. There is an active motile smaller gamete called the microgamete, and there is a larger non-motile gamete called the macrogamete. And microgamete moves to the macrogamete and brings about fertilization or reproduction. അപ്പം അതാണ് അനൈസോഗമി. ഇവിടെ ഗാമറ്റ് തമ്മിൽ വ്യത്യാസമുണ്ട്. ഒരു ഗാമറ്റ് ചെറുതാണ്, അതിന് സഞ്ചരിക്കാൻ പറ്റും, അതാണ് മൈക്രോഗാമറ്റ്. ഒരു ഗാമറ്റ് വലുതാണ്, അത് സഞ്ചരിക്കില്ല, അതാണ് മാക്രോഗാമറ്റ്. മൈക്രോഗാമറ്റ് സഞ്ചരിച്ച് മാക്രോഗാമറ്റിൻ്റെ അടുത്ത് വന്നിട്ടാണ് ഇവിടെ പ്രത്യുൽപാദനം സാധ്യമാവുന്നത്. So this is anisogamy. The third one is oogamy. In oogamy, the male gamete is produced from male reproductive structure. So male gamete is called anthrozoid, and it is formed from the male reproductive structure called antheridium. And the female gamete, which is called ovum, is produced from the female reproductive structure called oogonia. So in oogamy, we find the formation of specialized reproductive structures, male reproductive structure or antheridium producing the male gamete or anthrozoid, which can move through water, and female reproductive structure called oogonia producing the female gamete or ovum. And anthrozoid moves through water to the oogonia and fuses with the ovum. In polysiphonia, we find that the male gamete is non-motile. So it is called spermatium, and it is produced in specialized structures called the spermatangium, while the female reproductive structure is the carpagonium. In Cara, we find the formation of reproductive structures called globules and nucleus at nodes. In Sargassum, we find depressions called conceptacles in which the reproductive structures are arranged. So several algae which show oogamy have the presence of complex, specialized, and these reproductive structures may be present in specialized structures within the algae also. So these are the different modes of sexual reproduction. And we mentioned asexual and vegetative propagation. So in this video, we complete our talk with reproduction, and we'll continue with the general characters of algae in the next video. Thank you very much.